Hello again, friends. Jacob here, Mad Crazy Reviews, back with another director spotlight. Today we're going to talk about Bong Joon-ho, South Korean filmmaker. I hope you've heard of him. He's a very skilled filmmaker, but I had honestly not anticipated getting to him so quickly in this series of ongoing videos. I don't have a real strict list. I just have kind of a rough names of a bunch of people I'm interested in, a bunch of people whose work I have enjoyed, and I just want to talk about them. So, a bunch of people on that list. He's on there, just wasn't number three, but I'll share a little story with you. So, why Bong Joon-ho number three after Guy Ritchie at number two and after Orson Welles at number one? So, I came across Bong Joon-ho, it was probably 2006 or so. It was whatever year The Host came out, because that's the first movie of his that I saw. And how that came up was I was living in St. Louis at the time, going to undergrad, and so in film school, and I started to hear about this movie, The Host. It was getting rave reviews, it was an international success, a big hit at the time, and also a foreign film, which isn't super common in the United States to have a successful foreign film financially. And I kept hearing about it getting compared to Jaws, and so that obviously catches my interest because I'm a big fan of Jaws. And my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, she had recently seen it with her family. They're all very interested in movies and big fans of anything that's good, and her dad especially is a bit of a film buff, and he really likes foreign movies. So they went as a family to watch it, and she told me afterwards, because she was visiting them out of town from where I was living. She was like, "You got to see this movie. It's fantastic." And so I did, and I agreed. Fantastic. And I didn't do much of a dive at the time. I believe that's his fourth film, if I'm remembering correctly. But I really enjoyed it, and then enjoyed Snowpiercer a few years later, enjoyed Parasite a few years after that. So I've enjoyed what I've seen, but I'll be honest, I hadn't done a dive into his filmography until fairly recently. Now, the reason for the dive is because earlier this year, in probably January, I read a book called Mickey 7, written by Edward Ashton. You can find the recording on that on YouTube, Spotify. You can find an original and short inspired by it on YouTube Shorts. But the reason I read that book was because Bong Joon-ho was adapting that book into a movie he's called Mickey 17. So slightly different, but anyway, really roundabout way of saying this. I was asked to appear on a podcast about the book and then the film adaptation. So read the book, we discussed it in February. The podcast is called Film Literate, and very good show if you're looking for a good podcast. Very entertaining, especially if you like books and if you like movies, because the whole premise of the show is the host, Devin Diazoni, he will read the book, and then watch the film adaptation, and then kind of compare and contrast the two. So we did the book episode in February, and that was in anticipation of the film release, which was in March. And so to prepare for the film release, I said to myself, I have to be as prepared as possible. So I went through his entire filmography. So that would be Barking Dogs Never Bite. That was in the year 2000. I'm probably going to get the years of these wrong. His second film was Memories of Murder, which I believe was 2003. Mother, I think, was number three, and then The Host. So I might have the years off a little bit here. And then I believe number five was Snowpiercer, and then Okja, Parasite, and finally his eighth film, Mickey 17. If you want more thoughts on any of those specifically, you can check Instagram for written reviews. You can also check the Film Literate podcast if you want to hear about Mickey 7 the book or Mickey 17 the movie more specifically and much more in depth. Like they're pretty beefy episodes, so we go into much more detail than I tend to on this platform. So anyway, went through each of his films, and now that's kind of a long way of explaining why he's going to be the third filmmaker, because he's freshest in my mind. So here we go. He's really skilled, really talented guy. I think, in my opinion, he's probably the best filmmaker working currently as far as changing a tone within a film, even within a scene, very, very quickly and very, very effortlessly. You can see this in every one of his movies. Like, all of them have a little bit of suspense thriller aspect. All of them have like high drama, high emotion. All of them have comedy, even like slapstick comedy. Sometimes there's just body humor. The range of material within the same film has always been very, very impressive, even from the start. I had not heard of Barking Dogs Never Bite until I decided to watch all of his movies, and I was pleasantly surprised that in the very first film you can see all of these skills. So that's pretty cool. So to get into each film a little more specifically, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time doing this, but Barking Dogs Never Bite is basically about a young man who's trying to become a teacher. He's having trouble finding work, and he's being just driven crazy by the sound of a dog barking in his apartment complex. Now, no one is supposed to own an animal in this complex, so he kind of makes it his mission to find this dog and take care of it. And by take care of it, I mean kill the dog. So obviously this wouldn't go over well with a Western audience like the United States, where, man's best friend is a dog. So I imagine if it was released here, it did not make much money. I honestly have not checked on these numbers, but it would be a big surprise to me if that was a financial success overseas. But it's still a very good movie. It's very funny, it's very shocking, it's very suspenseful. There's some really cool stuff in there. So I do recommend it, but you do have to know that is the premise. And he does actually kill one dog purposely, like straight up throws the dog off the top of a building, and then another dog kind of by accident. And it'll make more sense if you watch the movie. Memories of Murder is fantastic, like truly, I think, a masterpiece of a movie. And again, it has a lot of different tones. It's in a lot of ways kind of a South Korean version of Zodiac. Like, it's inspired by a real serial killer. It's inspired by a killer who at the time had not been caught. And it has a lot of those familiar elements. Like, it's very much a movie about police work and about the process of trying to solve a crime. And if you find that interesting, I think you'd find it to be a really good movie. But also, I think even if you don't typically like procedural dramas or procedural like TV shows or movies, I still think it's a fantastic movie anyway. So I would highly, highly recommend that one. And then I might have the order wrong here, but you already know how I feel about The Host. Great movie, great monster movie, and then again, great mix of humor, horror, suspense, a lot of great stuff there. And then Mother, which is a really good movie, but for some reason, when it comes to ranking all of these, I put it a little bit lower. Like, it just doesn't resonate as much with me for some reason. But again, I say that, and I still gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 rating, which for me is pretty high if you've checked out the ratings episode on Spotify. Then going from there, let's see, that's halfway through. So then we get to Snowpiercer, which at the time I first saw it was really good. And then when I came back to it, I was less high on it. I would probably put that towards the bottom of the rankings, frankly. And it's still, again, very good. I would say 3 out of 5 at the worst. You could even make a case 3.5, That one I think doesn't quite strike the balance as well. Like it still has these really impressive tonal shifts, like in the sequence on the train car where they're kind of going against these authority figures. I'm sure they're kind of like they made me think of like a motorcycle gang almost. Like they're all dressed the same and they all have these like primitive weapons. Like that sequence goes from harrowing like almost horror because the lights go out and then like just riveting action with the fighting and then a moment of like melodrama when they need fire and then just really absurd humor almost because they stopped to celebrate the new year because they passed by this milestone. It's really really impressive. Maybe it's one that I need to watch a third time or fourth time, but for some reason it just doesn't resonate as much with me personally. Then we get to Okja, probably the most divisive film of his career so far, because it's taken a lot of big swings. Like you're satirizing like capitalism, greed, factory farming. You're making a very compelling case for veganism with a computer generated animal, which is pretty impressive. And at the same time, you have these moments of really big, broad, almost slapstick or vaudevillian humor. And again, some really riveting action. Like the sequence where, what's her name? I can't remember the girl's name who's taking care of Okja. But when she's trying to break him out of the back of the van, and then he's just running through these like street markets, that's one of the most exciting, hilarious, and just visually interesting chase scenes I think I've ever seen in a movie. Certainly that I've seen in quite a while. Like maybe it's not as suspenseful or riveting as like Tom Cruise in an action film like Mission Impossible, but Mission Impossible's amazing series. But still, saw that sequence is just incredible. The thing that brings that movie down and that makes it so divisive is Jake Gyllenhaal. He makes so many big and just kind of strange choices that just don't fit in with the rest of the movie that makes it brings it down a whole like star or so or star and a half depending who you're talking to, I would imagine. Like I still gave it I think 3.5, maybe pushing a 4 because I loved everything else, did not love his performance. So take that as you will. Then I think that brings us up to Parasite, which, I mean, if you haven't seen Parasite and you're watching a video about Bong Joon-ho, there's definitely a gap in your education. You should definitely rectify that immediately because that is another just masterpiece. One of the best movies of the past decade. I think you'd be hard to argue with that. And again, a perfect encapsulation of him as a filmmaker. It's funny. It's got body humor. Like there's a point later on in the film when their apartment is flooding and literal like feces is spilling over the top of their toilet and they're trying to keep it under control. Um, you've got heart pounding suspense. You've got this horror element. Like there's so many things happening in this movie. You've got the class commentary, the satire. It's a fantastic movie. You got to see it. Mickey 17 coming off of Parasite is a bit of a disappointment, not gonna lie, but that's just because Parasite is so good. Mickey 17, I think, is still really, really good, and I think if you're looking for an independent movie, if you're looking for a movie that does things differently than what you typically see, if you're one of those people who complains, oh, Hollywood doesn't make interesting movies anymore, or every movie's the same, or there's nothing original. Yes, I know it's based on a book, but this is still unlike popular cinema and unlike most books, frankly. Like, it's really good, it's really funny, it's really interesting, it asks some really interesting questions, so I think you should still check it out. I would still rate it a 3.5, maybe even a 4 out of 5 if I rewatch it. Now, Bong Joon-ho, as a filmmaker in whole, what do you say about the guy? He's just really skilled, like I said, at this tonal game he plays with the audience. But also, he's just got a lot to say. Like, he has a lot to say about class, nature, the way we treat animals, the way we treat the poor, the way we treat the working class. he's got a lot to say about the body, like bodies in general, the human body, animal bodies, and it's just really, really cool. He's such an interesting guy. One thing that was interesting, you can see all of these things in his movies, like I said, from the first film. I don't think there's a lot you could say stylistically. Like, he doesn't have like a signature shot. Like, he does tend to use slow motion in really intense moments, and he does tend to use a lot of like kind of classical music or even jazz at times. But I wouldn't say there's like a signature shot other than maybe having a lot of people gathered around a table and like hanging out. Like that tends to happen a lot where you have usually it's family or friends and they're just hanging out drinking or having a meal. That sense of like close knit community also plays a really important part. So anyway, I got to wrap this up. Bong Joon-ho, super talented. You got to check out his movies. He's a really, really skilled guy. One of our best directors working currently. I think, again, another statement that would be hard to argue with. So, again, I'm Jacob. This has been Mad Crazy Reviews. Please share this with friends, like it, subscribe. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Substack, pretty much any major social media platform except TikTok. Maybe I'll get into that at some point. I just don't have a lot of interest in TikTok for whatever reason. But I hope you found interest in this. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.